reading as we go through. I want to, along the line of the reading, there's this chart in the back, this map from Egypt to Canaan. If you're like me, you're reading through Numbers, and especially at the beginning of Deuteronomy, and he recounts their journeys, and you're like, this means nothing to me. This is all just random. It might as well just be random words in order. So I've made this sort of map/chart thing. If you want a visual representation, you can find others if you want, a visual representation of their journeys in Numbers. And of course, as in Deuteronomy, as they're about to enter the land of Canaan, we'll read the beginning of that Deuteronomy this week. Moses recounts for them their journeys. That's available too if you want that sort of a visual representation of the information. We're going to talk about Numbers today. Not all of it, but most of it. It'll be a summary of Numbers as we go through. We're going through our reading, and we just read not all of Numbers, but the bulk of Numbers. We ended, I think, in 29 on Saturday, beginning at Numbers 30 tomorrow. There are a lot of numbers in the book of Numbers, especially at the beginning and the end. The Israelites take a census of each generation. But the bulk of the book is not Numbers. The bulk of the book is their wanderings in the wilderness, in the desert. Of course, we have the initial journey from Sinai. They leave and they head out. Side note, they're at Sinai for like 2 years. This is not like they're just there for a bit and then they leave. They're there for a while. The spies, of course, they go up. They're going to rebel. They're going to go into the land. The spies come back. We can't do this. This is horrible. The people rebel against God. And so they wander around. If you look at the chart, you can't see it. It's too far away. I have a little spiral of they just spent 38 years. They're just wandering around over and over in this like tiny patch of land for 38 years. They just wander around before finally they go around Edom. They have to go south around Edom and then back north on the eastern side of the Jordan. And the book of Numbers ends with them on the eastern side of the Jordan, far up north. They have several wars and clashes with people as they're about to enter into the land of Canaan. The book is better called In the Desert. That's what the Jews call the book, still even to this day in the Jewish Old Testament. It's not Numbers, it's In the Desert or In the Wilderness. That's what the book is about. It's about their journey in the wilderness. Now, interspersed with this, of course, is more of the law. As they're journeying through, they set up the tent of meeting, they set up the tabernacle, and God continues to meet with Moses at the tent of meeting and convey the law to them and give them more instruction. And so, if anything, the main theme of Numbers is their struggle to obey that law, their struggle to trust in Yahweh and obey his instructions for them. Exodus, they come out of the land of Egypt. They have this great victory. It ends on Sinai. They construct the holy things in the tabernacle. Leviticus is this just giant list of the laws. And then Numbers is basically about how they're incapable of doing it, about their struggles to obey. Numbers 11, complaining about the food. Hey, I know we have this miraculous food here, but it's not good enough. Right? It's so petty. I don't know. Petty, I don't know if that's the right word. Numbers 12, Aaron and Miriam complain/rebel against Moses. Numbers 13 and 14, which is where we'll really begin. This is when the people, they spy out the land, they come back and they distrust God. They trust the spies instead. Number 16, we have Korah's rebellion against Moses. We'll talk about a lot of these as we go through today. Numbers 20, Moses strikes the rock instead of speaking to the rock. Numbers 21, the people complain again. They're struck by serpents. Numbers 25, some of the people worship Baal and they have to be slaughtered and killed. As we touch on these stories, we're going to go through most of these. I don't think quite all of them, but I want to emphasize the human emotions and motivations. We've read several of the passages throughout the year in the New Testament. The things that are written in former days are written for our instruction. Lest let any of you take heed lest he fall. No temptation is overtaking you that's not common to man. The emotions, the motivations, the human struggles in Numbers are emblematic of our own. We still struggle in all the same ways to obey God. Now, the details of our law are different, the details of the specifics of what God wants. But the problem with obeying is us. It's not the law. It's us, our motivations, our emotions. So we'll begin with the rebellion of the spies. This really sets the tone of the whole book in Numbers 13 and 14. Numbers 14, verse 1, of course, the spies have gone into the land. One of the things that's interesting on the map, if you have the map, they go really far up. They go like all the way past the Jordan River, all the way north, and then they come back. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, the whole congregation of them, because when the spies come back, 10 of them are like, these people are giant. They have fortified cities. We can't do this. This is horrible. The people grumble. Would that we had died in the land of Egypt. They're so melodramatic. Would that we had died in the land of Egypt. Would that we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to one another, let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt. This is too hard. Now, remember, this was 2 years, now it was a little more than 2 years ago in the story. What were they doing in Egypt? They were slaves. They were forced to hard labor. Why do you want to go back? Because of fear. This is the crux of the story. They were afraid. And really, fear, thinking again about the human motivations for why we don't obey God. I don't know if fear is number one, might be number two, next to pride. Fear is one of the main reasons we choose not to obey. They were afraid of the inhabitants of Canaan. Now, compared to the nomadic Israelites, they've come out of Egypt. Yeah, the people are large. They have mighty cities. Their cities are fortified, is what the text says. So maybe they do seem more impressive compared to the Israelites. But again, 2 years ago, what did they see Yahweh do? Strike every firstborn dead in one night. The sun blotted out. All the water in Egypt turned to blood. What are these cities? They are straw. They are chaff compared to the power of Yahweh. What made them forget was fear. Fear blinded them to the remembrance of what God had done, which is what God says in Numbers 14:11. The Lord said to Moses, how long will this people despise me? How long will they not believe in me? In spite of all the signs I've done. I've done so many things, and they still don't listen. I will strike them with pestilence and disinherit them, and I will make of you a nation greater and mightier today. We're not going to talk about this. Several times throughout the book, God sort of gives Moses an option. Hey, Moses, why don't I just kill all the Israelites and we'll start over? And Moses talks him down each time. One of the interesting things about Numbers, we're not going to talk about it. It's relevant in spite of all the signs that I've done. I've done so many things. How long will this people despise me? It took 2 years. 2 years to forget what God had done. And I use forget in air quotes. They didn't forget. They just let fear dominate their reasoning. They let fear of the current situation overwhelm what they knew to be true. We do that, don't we? We let fear overwhelm us. It blinds us to the past providence of God. Fear destroys faith and trust. What are you afraid of? That's what Satan's going to use. Whatever it is that you're afraid of, that is the thing that Satan is going to use against you. Fear is one of the main reasons we struggle to obey. Second thing, several themes come out of the book of Numbers. One of them is rebellion against Moses. Several times, prominent people rebel against Moses. And again, despite all that Moses had done, similar to how they distrust God, despite all God had done, they rebel against Moses, despite all Moses had done. Numbers 12:1. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman he had married. He had married the Cushite woman, and they said, has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also? And the Lord heard it. Now, one of the things that's interesting about Numbers 12, Moses is the meekest man in all the earth. He decides not to defend himself. Get choked up thinking about it. God comes down and says, how dare you? I speak to you guys in dreams or visions. I talk to Moses face to face. How dare you speak against Moses? Moses allows God to speak up for him. And then just a few chapters later, the same thing happens again. Number 16, they assembled themselves as the rebellion of Korah. They assembled themselves against Moses and Aaron and said to them, you have gone too far. All in the congregation are holy, every one of them. And the Lord is among them. Why do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord? Now, in both of these cases, there's an excuse given, a reason. For Moses, it was the Cushite woman. For the rebellion of Korah, it was they were maybe exalting themselves too much. But I think as we dig a little deeper, we ask the question, why would they rebel against Moses? We might be gracious to their reasoning. Well, Moses has not brought them into the land they were promised, right? Moses, we've been in the wilderness for a while. You brought us out of Egypt. I thought we were going to get to the land of Canaan. That hasn't happened yet. Maybe Moses, you shouldn't be in charge anymore. That'd be sort of a gracious reason. Aaron and Miriam, they give the reason of the Cushite woman. He didn't marry an Israelite. Okay, maybe that's okay, except God clearly thought it was fine. Otherwise, God would have said something. The rebellion of Korah, you've elevated yourself too much. Maybe they were chafing against the law of Moses, right? These onerous instruments. Moses, you've given us so many laws. There's so many commands, and we can't do it anymore. So maybe the problem is Moses, right? The commands are too onerous, so we'll get rid of Moses. He's the one that gave the law. But I think ungraciously, and I think as you read these stories, it really becomes apparent, there's some jealousy, right? Has not God spoken through us also? Right? We're just as impressive as Moses. The people of Korah, all the assembly are holy. How come you get to be in charge? We're all holy. I think there is some jealousy and resentment of Moses' authority and leadership. However we interpret this, we find again human emotion at the heart of the problem. Come to today. Why do people resist the structure of the church that God set up? Well, we can think graciously, right? We got to get with the times. We don't want to appear whatever bad quality that you want to put in there. But God gave these instructions. He gave these commands. We either, accept them or we don't. And why do people resist? Why do we resist the authority of God in our own individual lives? And again, maybe it's the commands are too onerous. It's too hard to be righteous. It's too hard to do the right thing. Well, at the end of the day, you're simply doing what Aaron and Miriam and Korah did. You're choosing to elevate some other thing in place of God's authority. How many times have churches been destroyed by jealousy or resentment? How many times have your own lives been destroyed by jealousy or resentment? We all struggle with the same things. In the book of Numbers, God makes it very clear, I've chosen who's in charge, and you can either get with the program or you're dead. Like literally dead. In the rebellion of Korah, God says, let the earth open up and swallow them, and the earth just opens up and they all die. In the case of Aaron and Miriam, God strikes Miriam with a plague. He relents. She doesn't die. But he doesn't act that way today, right? Like the ground is not going to open up and swallow us if we resist God. But the consequence is still the same. It just is going to be after we die, when we face judgment. You can rebel if you want, but the end result will be the same. The one constant in Israel was complaining. So much complaining. And we might actually even expand it a bit. The one constant in humanity is complaining. So many times we complain. Now, the Israelites, they complained about food, water, their situation. They complained about Moses. A lot of things to complain about. And I think about our own lives. How often do we complain about the situations we find ourselves in? Numbers chapter 11 is so, in some ways, poignant. I was going to say dumb. The people are so dumb in Numbers chapter 11. The people complained in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes. And when the Lord heard it, his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some outlying parts of the camp. Okay. We have story number one. They complain, fire breaks out, consumes them. The people cry out to Moses. Moses prayed to the Lord. The fire died down. The name of that place was called Taberah because of the fire of the Lord that burned among them. Okay, if it was just that story, we understand. People complain. God doesn't like it, and it's, at least in the mind of God, complaining is something that's worthy of separating us from him, right? The fire that breaks out. What makes Numbers 11 so stupid? The next verse. Now the rabble that was among them had a strong craving, and they also wept and said, oh, that we had meat to eat. Did you not just see the fire? Did you not just see the thing that happened when you complained? And then literally the next verse, let's complain some more. Oh, that we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt that cost nothing. The cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. I'm being a little melodramatic. But now our strength is dried up and there's nothing at all but this manna to look at. And again, the crazy thing that they do it twice in a row. Literally twice in a row. There's fire that breaks out in the camp and consumes some of the outerlying portions of the camp. And then the people are like, oh, God won't do the same thing twice. So they complain again. Again, the question, how long does it take for us to forget? When God does great things in our lives or disciplines us, we forget because, in this case, why did they complain the second time? Because of a strong craving. We rebel sometimes because of fear, sometimes because of jealousy, sometimes because of resentment, sometimes because we don't feel like God's acting fast enough. But another main reason we rebel against God is the lust of the flesh. Our desires compete with God's will, leading to disobedience and distrust. We justify, we rationalize. In the case here, the rationalization, okay, I know those people complained before and that God killed them, but my craving's really strong. Like, I really want some meat. So I know you did this literally the last verse. They wouldn't have thought about it in terms of verse. I know you did this literally last week, but you just don't understand how strong of a craving I have. Like, I really need meat. I need better food. That's what we do. We justify and we rationalize. I know that God acted this way in the past, and I know that God didn't like this behavior when other people did it, but when I do it, it's okay, right? When I do it, it's because you just don't understand my desires, my cravings. We justify, we rationalize, and of course the desires of the flesh are wide-ranging. You may not struggle with the same thing someone else does, but it's okay when I have a craving. When you have a craving, it's horrible and depraved. When I have a craving, it's fine. It's totally fine. Don't worry about it. That's what we do all the time, over and over and over. Now, we should note, this is the last of our stories in Numbers before we make the final application, that not even Moses was exempt from the struggle to obey. In Numbers chapter 20, verse 10, God tells Aaron and Moses, okay, they need water to drink. The people want water. God tells Moses and Aaron, go talk to the rock, and water will come out of it. Then Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly together before the rock, and he said to them, hear now, you rebels, shall we bring water for you out of this rock? And Moses lifted up his hand and struck the rock with the staff twice, and water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their livestock. It's interesting. God said, speak to the rock, and it would bring out water. Moses didn't do that. God still blessed the people. God still gave them the thing that they needed, even though Moses hadn't done exactly the right thing. But Moses did have consequence. Aaron did have consequence. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not believe in me to uphold me as holy in the eyes of the people of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly into the land. Now, in this story, we're not explicitly told in Numbers why Moses did this. Psalm 106, 32 and 33, we're not going to read it. The psalmist says Moses did this out of anger, which I think in the story we can get, right? He comes to them, shall we bring water for you? And Moses, he's at the end of his rope. You guys keep complaining over and over. You've rebelled against me twice. You don't do what God wants. You foolish people. Fine, I will give you water. Slam. But that's not what God said to do. And it might be a bit harsh, seem harsh to us rather, that Moses would fail one major time, one, out of all the times he's leading Israel, in such a slight way. He hit a rock instead of talking to it. And the punishment is so strong. Why? This is just another version of the sin of Nadab and Abihu, who offered strange fire before the Lord. Fire came out from before the Lord in Leviticus 10 and consumed Nadab and Abihu. They died before the Lord, and Moses said to Aaron, this is what the Lord has said, among those who are near me I will be sanctified, and before all the people I will be glorified. And Aaron held his peace. Moses was near the Lord, that is, not a priest per se, but he's one of the leaders of the people. And thus he's held to a higher standard of sanctification. Moses, you're the one in charge. You, above everyone else, need to act in the way that I say. And of course, the mercy of God was such that, unlike Nadab and Abihu, God did not just strike Moses dead. Moses, your consequence is you don't get to go into the land. The book of Numbers then is emblematic of human struggle. In this case, in the case of Moses, again, seemingly so innocuous, he just hit a rock, but God told him what he wanted him to do. And Moses let his anger control his reaction, let his anger control how he acted, and then he did not do the thing that God said to do. We come to Hebrews chapter 3, verses 7 through 14, which was the reading. We're going to start a class, next Sunday morning. We're going to start a class on Hebrews. Actually, we're going to be several classes on Hebrews. We're going to have the general adult class in the classroom. I'll be teaching that on Hebrews. We're going to have the Voices class, which is it's a smaller, more of a discussion class in the FLC for the adults. And then the teens are also going to do Hebrews. Hebrews is a book that really relies on Old Testament knowledge, like we see here, where we have the stories in Numbers, and the Hebrew writer comes along, and he uses these Old Testament stories to make all sorts of comparisons. Now's the time to go through Hebrews, because we've just been reading all of these Old Testament stories. Here's a good example of it. As we think about the contrast between the Israelites and their struggle and their difficulty in obeying and ours. Hebrews 3 verse 7. Therefore, as the Holy Spirit says, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion on the day of testing in the wilderness, where your fathers put me to the test and saw my works for 40 years. That's the rebellion of the spies in Numbers 13 and 14. They heard my voice, go into the land. They saw my mighty works, and they rebelled. They hardened their hearts. Therefore, I was provoked to that generation, and I said, they always go astray in their heart, which we see over and over in Numbers. Time after time after time. They always go astray in their heart. They have not known my ways, as I swore in my wrath. They shall not enter my rest, which incidentally is the consequence for Aaron and Moses, right? I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. That applied to Moses and Aaron because they also failed to uphold the holiness of the Lord. Take care, brothers, then, and this is the application. Take care, you in this room, us, as we're thinking about our own relationship to God, we have to take care lest there be in any of us an evil, unbelieving heart leading us to fall away from the living God. And I'm supplying the us instead of you because this is for us. Take care lest there be in any of us an evil, unbelieving heart, which will lead us to fall away from the living God. The consequence is you will not enter his rest. Not the land of Canaan, but heaven. Take care that we do not harden our hearts. Exhort one another every day, as long as it's called today. That's what I'm doing right now, by the way. I'm exhorting you that none of you, and again us, that none of us may be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. That, again, phrase hardened, the idea of a hard heart is you're not willing to listen to what God wants. You're not willing to let God's word change you. You're not willing to change your life to fit God's commands. You're not willing to accept and receive his instruction, hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. My strong craving, the lust of the flesh, my anger, my fear, my jealousy and resentment, my bitterness, these are all the deceitfulness of sin, the things that harden our hearts. We have come to share Christ if we hold our original confidence firm to the end. The Israelites, they come out of the land of Egypt. They saw the great things of Moses through Moses. All they needed to do was hold that original confidence firm to the end. 2 years go by. Hold that confidence. God did all those things in Egypt. He's going to do them here. Hold your confidence. I don't know how long you've been a Christian. But life wears us down. Satan digs and digs and digs, and our hearts, if we're not careful, they start to calcify. They start to harden. Our emotions never go away. We always struggle with these things. And so the instruction, do not harden your hearts. The stories in Numbers show us how hearts become hard. Through fear and distrust, through jealousy and resentment, through craving and lust, through anger and bitterness. I don't know what you struggle with, but I suspect it's in that list. It's somewhere in there. And if you're not careful, it will lead you to an evil, unbelieving heart, leading you to fall away from the living God. The answer is not to leave. The answer is not to distrust. The answer is to soften our hearts to receive his instruction so that we will enter his rest. That's what's at stake here, is entering his rest. We need to take care. How do we do that? Well, a couple of ways that he talks about here. Remember Romans 7? The things that I want to do are the things that I don't. The things that I don't want to do, those are the things that I do. Wretched man that I am, who will save me from this law of sin and death? But thanks be to God who gives us victory through Jesus Christ. The answer is Jesus, obviously. In Hebrews chapter 3 and Hebrews chapter 10, there's another, and that is each other. Exhort one another, that you may not become hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. In Hebrews chapter 10, the writer says, therefore don't neglect to meet together, but stir up one another to love and good works. We need each other. We offer the invitation generally at every assembly because I know that we need each other to hold each other accountable, to show us what's possible, to show us what's right, to say, hey, you know what? It seems like your heart is getting a little hard. Has anybody ever said that to you? Probably not. You could, though. Seems like your heart is hardening. What can we do about that? How can we make that right? What do you need to overcome that struggle? Ultimately, the answer is Jesus. To trust and obey, to lead, that he will lead where we need to go. When we walk with the Lord in the light of his word, what a glory he sheds on our way. He wanted to do that for Israel. He wanted to bring them into the land. He wants to do it for you. If you're ready, come while we stand.